Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Today we're going to hear inspiring words from Rev. Ed Jones of Trinity United Methodist Church in Houston, Texas, and he's sharing about how his congregation and how his efforts to impact schools and school systems in the Houston area has really created some great ministry opportunities. And we're also going to be joined with Camille Roddy, who is part of the Western North Carolina Conference and works with our Congregations for Children program. And she's going to help us connect the dots between Reverend Jones and his work and how we might work and consider ministry in our own context, in our own conference. Welcome to the Means of Grace podcast. My name is bmateer, and I am the Associate Director of Missional Engagement for the Western North Carolina Conference. And I'm excited today to welcome two guests to talk about school partnerships and how churches are able to work with schools during this time of COVID. And those guests are Camille Roddy, and she is the Congregations for Children Chair of the Western North Carolina Conference, and she attends St. Paul United Methodist Church in Winston-Salem. And then Reverend Ed Jones, who is the pastor of Trinity United Methodist Church in Houston, Texas, which is a historic 155-year-old church in the historic district of Houston. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Camille, I'd like for you to start off and just give us an overview of what Congregations for Children is and kind of the work that you do to support churches and school partnerships.
Certainly, Congregations for Children is a resource within the Western North Carolina Conference. We are under the umbrella of the Mission Engagement Team. Our foci is to support churches as they seek to transform the lives of children and families living in poverty. Our four focus areas are poverty awareness and advocacy, K through 3 literacy, basic needs, and family engagement. Our churches can do a variety of activities ranging from summer reading programs to summer feeding programs to after school care, reading buddies. And so as we have engaged in this work, we see a variety of ways that churches partner with schools, and we encourage churches to first and foremost center themselves in prayer and let the Holy Spirit guide them and create prayer teams within their churches and look for ways in which the church can partner either with the local school or with local school districts to best serve the needs of their community.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Camille. I know you and I have been on several Zoom calls and fielding specific questions about how churches can respond and how churches can work with their schools and to support children's needs during this time. And I know you came across Reverend Jones. I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about how that came about, and then if you could maybe introduce yourself, Reverend Jones, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing down in Houston so we can have some ideas here in Western North Carolina.
So one of the great things about being a Methodist is the connectional nature of how we do what we do. And I had the opportunity several years ago to work with our foundation for the conference in putting together workshops on stewardship within the African American church. And a wonderful article came across our news feed on how the conference in Houston, Texas were actually engaging with church school partnerships. And there was not only a news, but there was also a video clip. And I actually reached out to Reverend Melvin Amerson with the Texas Methodist Foundation, and Reverend Amerson connected me with Ed Jones, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I'll let Reverend Jones just dive in and talk more about the wonderful things that are happening in the great city of Houston.
Well, thank you, and thank y'all for allowing me to be a part of it. And I can share with you that it's been just a unique time. I'm been a pastor at Trinity United Methodist for 3 years, celebrating my third year at annual conference, which was amazing because we did it online. I hope we never go back. And it was just a opportunity for us to just see some of the things that we've been doing. And my connection with Melvin, I'm a church planner. I planted a church probably 15 years ago, and the stewardship systems in the church was very vital to the church to be able to survive, and we were able to create healthy systems in the church for stewardship during that time period. And so I'm so grateful that Melvin has been busy in your conference in strengthening the stewardship systems of African American churches and also just churches altogether. He definitely is a blessing and been a blessing to me. Since I've been at Trinity, being the mother church, 155 years old, the first African-American church in the city of Houston, we have done our best to try to see what was going on in the community. And Trinity is what they would call back in the day a silk stocking church. All of the educators, all of the former college professors and presidents, everybody was part of this church in its history. We have 20 schools named after individuals who gave leadership through Trinity United Methodist Church, meaning our members are named after 20 schools all throughout the metropolitan area. So we have a real deep history in education in the community. And once getting to the church, just trying to survey, look at the data and see what's in the mission field and contextualize where I'm at. I quickly discovered that we had several generations missing, meaning we had the great generations and the baby boomers. That was the population, and we had more great generation. It's probably around 50-40 in terms of the boomers and generation of the great generation. What was missing was generation X, Y, and Z. And when I realized that Trinity was very, very strong in the great generation, and they did a lot of great things, the baby boomers never drove the church before. They never really ascended to leadership. Why? Because they were still thought of as youth. And their children, the baby boomers' children, they didn't even have that much dedication. They just gave the church deuces and they were out of there because the reluctance for the generation X in the boomers to change. And so after many truthful conversations, it's hard to tell a church that is an established church that you may be doing great now, but you're very sick. And you're not only sick, all of your sister churches are sick as well. And so when you look at many of the demographics for many of our churches, we all have the same symptoms. We call them, we full of the great generation and baby boomers. And we don't have the ability to change too fast. So really looking and narrowing our focus down and seeing how we can, how can we reach generation X, Y, and Z? over the years, I've always had the opportunity, because when I was a church planter, I was inside of a school. We worshiped inside of school for 8 years. So all of our thinking was based on school. When you set up, when you take down, when you can leave up, it was based on a school schedule. And so life for that church kind of gathered around the school. And so when I came to Trinity, we had a school about a block from us, and we had great relationships. We had already been doing things in the school in those regards. But when I started looking a little bit deeper, realizing that I didn't have Generation X, Y, and Z in that church, that we were sending volunteers to the church, to the school, we didn't see a lot of people coming back to the church. And so instead of doing a lot of all the other things, we began to intensify our efforts at the school. We began to cultivate relationships with the school. We began to, anything the school needed, we wanted to be the first church or organization they would reach out to. We wanted to be the bat line to the school. We wanted to treat the teachers. We wanted to touch as many students as we can, because we needed to reach that population, because nearest the church of any one of our congregations, the schools are the future. The school have that population group that fits what our strategy to reach X, Y, and Z. We got to reach those students, because the grandparents X, the parents Y and Z, they all are within that school. And if we were able to cultivate relationships with them and provide some type of love and support and empowerment, maybe one day, just because we're cultivating this relationship, we can do something about it. So making sure we do everything we can to cultivate the relationship. And so it may have started with, school supplies, and it could be the Christmas, making sure we support giving kids who need support over Christmas. It was making sure that we treated all the educators and support staff with a meal. Those simple things, just doing things at the school, where I told the congregation all of our missional focus will be directed toward the school. But if I take a step back, the bishop set an initiative called All God's Children. And I believe the bishop saw all of these churches filled with the great generation and boomers. We all experiencing decline. We all trying to figure out what we do. But he basically told us to make sure we put all of our efforts into cultivating relationships with the elementary schools in our community to impact, one, to break the pipeline to prison by improving the reading literacy. And so it's about seven factors that they're really looking forward to doing. And so when I got to Trinity, I was able really to actualize part of that. And it was the foundation of what we will talk about a little bit more.
Well, I think there's some similarity between what's happening in your conference, Rev. Jones, and certainly what's happening in the Western North Carolina Conference. And even within the North Carolina Conference, the C4C initiative was a collaboration between the bishops, between the Western North Carolina Conference and the North Carolina Conference, who were paying very close attention to disparities in education, learning gaps, and recognized that the church needed to be at the center of the conversation on addressing that. So there was a bishops' conference somewhere along the way where everybody got the same message. So definitely the Holy Spirit is moving with the bishops in our conference and your conference as well, Reverend Jones. So we see that same effort happening here and in both of the North Carolina conferences, that energy is being put into how churches can be at the center of the conversation of meeting the needs of families and children in poverty.
And I think it's very important for that, specifically in the African American community, because in the Black church, the Black church has always been a central influencing place that impacts education in those communities. And as we began to cultivate this relationship, I remember calling, and being part of ministers' workshops or conversations where the principal will call all the pastors together and for a luncheon and just cry on our shoulders for what the school needs, and the school needs the support of the church. But this was the dynamic. Many of the churches did not reach those demographics that's inside of the school. So we are pastors in the in the community, but we haven't reached that demographic. And just speaking from my own vantage point, I know what some of the decisions we made that made us ineffective in reaching the community that we in. And speaking not only about Trinity, but looking at many of these churches that we have across the country that are closing left and right. They're merging. They have turned inward. They have what I call pseudo-folliculitis barbae. It's that understanding of an ingrown hair on your beard, on your face, I should say. In whatever that does, it creates something unhealthy because our church is focused inward, and we're sick because of it. And so making churches focus on elementary schools or any type of school helps us to think about the school first. And so because of that, we began to look at what were some of the needs that were going on in our community. And we discovered there was a need for an early learning center where the school has launched pre-K schools, teachings at the elementary level, but they got filled. That means we have a population that is not being served. And so because of the All God's Children initiative, in the conference is basically desiring to create Methodist children's centers across these underserved areas. Because our community is one of those, we volunteer to be a site. And so we've been in conversation about launching the school next year. And it was because of those conversations. We would gather monthly, talking about possibilities and all those type of things. But when COVID-19 hit, something happened where we shifted our focus about talking about what the future was going to look at, and then diverted it to what can we do now. So when COVID-19 hit, the school district was able to see the sudden drop of about 50 to 60% of students in HISD did not have the ability to go online and to participate in online education. And so when that happened, of course, our relationship with the school called and said, hey, we need computers. And we began doing everything we could to manifest, to come up with computers. Members brought computers. Members gave money for computers. We start making sure we used our influence in networks and identifying where we can find the computers. And so we were able to come up with close to 100 laptops and desktops to give to students. And so they were able to finish the semester, but the infrastructure was still weak, meaning you can give a child a computer, they still don't have the ability to go online because they don't have internet at home. And so we stayed focused on that and continued to talk as United Methodist. It was about 6 of us. And we all, all of us who were looking at starting a early learning center next year, we began having conversations and dreaming and envisioning. And Jill Daniels, who is the director of the All God's Children initiative here in the Texas Area Conference, she tried to get a hold with the superintendent of the school district, and she was not able to. But she reached out to me, and of course, all of these old educators that I have at Trinity, they said, oh, yeah, you're trying to reach this person? Oh, hold on for a second. Within a tweet, a text, and a post, a call, before you knew it, we had a meeting set up with the superintendent. We pitched a proposal, and that day she had walked out of a meeting and realized that her schools were not capable of meeting a need for all of the students in HISD. And we met that need that day. Now, this is the thing. On the call was probably 20 pastors of Methodist churches. And the superintendent heard that the Methodist church will supply anything that the school district needs in terms of space and all those things. And we went into the meeting. We didn't have no diagrams, no pie charts, no. We just had dreams and visions, and we just knew that we can create that opportunity. And the school district caught the vision. The leader, the superintendent, she went into our next meeting and said, "Hey, the Methodists are going to open up their churches, and we may be able to do something." And so that one meeting, that one time of aligning dreams, visions, and looking at a problem, but seeing the solution for that problem was the vision. It lined things up where it allowed what we talked about to kind of manifest before us. So the school district started to mull over it. They started to question it, look at it in all type of different ways. And the Methodists started, meeting and saying, okay, what do we need to do? And how do we do this? Who would like to do it? And so we did our part. The school district came back to us and said, okay, we will create a special initiative based out of COVID-19 to create this response. And so they hired a director or moved someone from doing something, and their sole job was to help coordinate this. And so we start meeting with that person and sharing what were some of the things that the church would need. All of our churches, not only in Texas, but anybody who's listening, there's not too many conferences that got a whole bunch of 20-year-old churches are filled with 30-year-old people. All of our churches have those who are 80, 70, 60 years old. They have all these conditions and they're afraid that they could serve. So what we did was we shared, hey, we would need some staffing. We can't do this with volunteers by ourselves. We'll need security. We'll need people to clean. We need these things. And the school district met those needs because guess what? All of these people would not have jobs if the schools are closed. The bus drivers don't drive. The people who cook in the kitchen don't cook. The people, so all of this was contingent upon making sure we provide space so their employees can continue to work and can help us provide space for our students. And it just worked like masterpiece. It just came together in different ways. It was scary because we didn't know how everything was going to work out. And but the Lord showed favor on us. And yes, when they advertised this in the city of Houston, they say the Methodist. And so a lot of my Baptist colleagues, they just continue to say, that's a Methodist thing. Every time they associate education, they think Methodist. They think the Methodists got it covered, because we were the early adopters to this. And if anybody's been Methodist long enough, know that we are not early adopters to nothing. We come back, we wait till something, we are still having contemporary worship wars in church 30 years, 40 years later. And that's the truth. But we were an early adopter on this, and I believe this is a sweet spot for us.
Well, Reverend Jones just articulated very well the organic nature of Congregations for Children, that it moves based on needs of the community, based on the needs of the church-school partnership. And I think oftentimes what immobilizes churches is trying to figure out all of the dots and how to cross all the T's and how to dot all of the I's. And Reverend Jones, I appreciate your comment that you were centered in trying to meet a need within the community. And in trying to do that, the opportunity presented itself where you could walk in. And I really like that there are resources within the congregation that you tapped into that could bring partners to the table that you couldn't reach on your own. And I think sometimes we forget. I was in a United Methodist Women's meeting several months ago, and half the women in the room were former educators. And they want to be asked, they want to be involved. And sometimes I think they don't know the influence that they have. And so I would encourage all of our congregations, as you are seeking to look at this work and you're feeling immobilized, I promise you that there is a former teacher, a former superintendent, a former guidance counselor within your congregations that know how to do this work and are connected to someone either within a school or within a school district that can help you and help your congregation look at the best ways to, again, just begin organically thinking about moving. And then once you make that first step, then all that you need will come together. And I hear Reverend Jones echoing that that's exactly what happened in Houston.
One of the things I was thinking about too is, you're in Houston, I'm in Charlotte, Camille's in Winston-Salem, but every community has a school, and every school has a need, and there's churches in every school, churches in every community that can meet those needs. And one of the things that struck me is that a lot of the stuff that you're doing to build kind of that working relationship with the school are very small steps. So, I mean, school supplies, supporting the teachers. So you've taken these little steps along the way to cultivate that relationship, as you mentioned, and through that you've built credibility, and you've been able to really be the church to the school. My wife is also an educator, so I realize that there are needs regardless of what community you're in, or what part of the state or what part of the country you're in.
And it doesn't have to be big. Brian, you hit the nail on the head that oftentimes if you just start small, if you do not have an existing relationship with a school, if you do not have an existing partnership with a district or a school, if you just begin, and particularly in the time and space that we are in now, students need earbuds. And so if your church can just provide earbuds to students who have computers, if a district is providing Chromebooks, that would be extremely helpful. And not necessarily looking at the ways in which you've done things in the past. We have done backpack drives, but if the school doesn't need a backpack drive because students are learning from home and they just may need boxes where they can organize their materials at home, I would start with connecting with the local principal or the local outreach coordinator for the school and simply ask the question, what is it that you need? What is it that students need that our church may be able to provide? And then if you do have an existing relationship with the school, I love what Reverend Jones did. Do not go in this alone. Form partnerships with other churches and form relationships ecumenically with other churches so that you can collectively look at how to make an impact. One of the things that we certainly are aware of, that there were gaps in learning prior to COVID. There were disparities with the digital divide in rural communities versus urban communities. Discrepancies in learning just across many socioeconomic sectors, and COVID has certainly exacerbated that. And I again encourage churches to look at ways in which you can fill those gaps and help parents who are just overwhelmed now, trying to figure out how they can not only maintain their jobs if they are working, but also teach their babies at home.
I think it's very much something that we need to really be very clear of, specifically in several of these settings, urban, rural, suburban, the socioeconomic reality that we're in, particularly in the community that I stand in. I have to realize that there's a lot of Black and brown students in these classrooms. And it is a justice issue that the conditions that corona virus manifested or revealed were pre-existing conditions. It amplified whatever illnesses that you had beforehand, weaknesses that you had beforehand. And so for this scenario, this is revealing to everyone that these educational gaps that we allow to be in existence is continuing to plague our community. And so for many of the churches, particularly churches in suburban churches that are majoritively white or are majoritively financially well off, how you can make a decision not to be engaged with this type of project and not open up your church because it's not your students. It's somebody else's students. It's those people. And that's a justice issue, and we have to really drill down on that, because if our heritage as United Methodists has always been to empower public education, if we are the ones that created Sunday school and education for those who need it, we have to make sure we be the heroes of this. This should be the distinguishing element of who we are. And we shouldn't be running behind what allowing fear to dictate what we must do. This is the thing that I want to make sure you're clear. A lot of people have allowed the church to be domesticated. We have a domesticated faith where it doesn't take risk. This is calling for churches to roll up their sleeves and mobilize and do something. Because the question that we ask at the beginning of coronavirus is, what do we want the community to say about Trinity after Corona? What do we want people to say? What do we want people to think about? And I know all of us have heard this, and we heard it so many times. Ask people in your community, would you miss it if you were gone? We've heard that for 20 years. Well, guess what? Coronavirus hit, and all of our churches went online. We're gone. We're out of the mission field. We took the gospel message and we privatized it. When we have people in our community are still hurting, where we can continue to provide worship services and discipleship, but what about the needs of our community, particularly those communities that are doing their best? You wouldn't believe how grateful I'm seeing parents on their way to work drop off their kids and grateful, because if they didn't have a place for their kid to go, they wouldn't be able to supply food on the table, a house over the head, and the ability to move around, to go to and fro. So we are really meeting a need that is so prevalent all across the nation. And so many of our, we have a lot of churches in Houston. And I could tell y'all that not everybody's rolling up their sleeves, running to the front line to serve in this. They hide behind the cross in a flame, believing that they are good Methodists retreating from meeting a basic need. And I think we need to be held accountable for that, because guess when this coronavirus is over with, the people who are in generation X, Y, and Z, they're going to look at all of these churches and say, where were you when they needed something to happen in the community? Because guess where my volunteers are coming from? Generation X, Y, and Z, young professionals in different organizations, institutions, they're all coming forth and they want to serve and volunteer in this because they see how we are being the hands and feet of Jesus. And I'm so grateful that I was obedient to whatever the Spirit led, because many of those people see what we're doing, and we became their church just because we saw a need and we met it.
Well, that reminds me, the scripture passage, is there a balm in Gilead? And that question certainly resonates in this particular time, I think. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Ann Wimberly, but Ann Wimberly is a United Methodist who is an educator, and Harvard University had her come and speak on how the church can be the church. And she speaks very prophetically about crying out, who are undergoing various degrees of ACEs trauma and are in communities that are plagued with violence. And they are looking and seeking the church to help them deal with a myriad of issues that come with all of that. And if you look at the state that we are in now with coronavirus, kids are hearing repeatedly news and information that provides them with stress. And I concur with Reverend Jones that this is a time for the church to be centered in how we are responding to the cry to be that balm in Gilead.
Reverend Jones, I'm inspired by your words, and I'm thinking about churches that and members of congregations in leadership positions that will be asking the questions of safety and liability, and thinking on the words of Wesley's "Do no harm, but do good and stay in love with God." Can you tell us a little bit of some of the things that you've maybe put in place at your church to circumvent those real risks, to keep your people safe while at the same time be in the hands and feet of Christ?
When we were in our brainstorming time with the district, of course, all of the fears of what would happen if, and we had to go through all of those scenarios, and so the school district has basically covered this with their liability insurance. So anything takes place at any place, they have a rider on it. And then churches have put the district, on top of that. So we wanted to make sure the liability issue is covered. And so with the school district and then with ours, with their insurance is a lot bigger than ours. I can tell you that. But practicing all of the things that it requires to have a school, every school system has the responsibility of safeguarding their educators and students, as well as the churches have the responsibility. So making sure you're doing temperature checks, you're doing you're asking all the questions to all of the students and parents, and making sure that you have the proper social distancing. And so if you can imagine a 6-foot table, what we did was we put one student on one side of the table and the student on the opposite side of the table. And we allow 3 tables to be in one room. And we just multiplied that in the larger settings. We did the same things. If it was a round table, we only let 2 students be at those tables. And we basically have the ability to provide space for 50 students. We're currently averaging around 25 students. And with hand sanitizing when you come in, making sure all the kids washing their hands. Everyone is wearing a mask at all times. And, making sure we are doing everything we can. The kids are not holding hands. They're not doing those type of things. The kids are being social distancing from 7 to 3 o'clock when they leave. The volunteers kind of stay on one side of, for us, in one setting where they can go in and do something and come back out, almost like the hot zone. You can go in the hot zone, come out the hot zone. The HISD staff is monitoring the classrooms And whatever there's a need, the staff have an opportunity to ask someone from the church. And if the church cannot meet that need, we have a phone call to the school. Wraparound specialist is what we call them, or the principal, and immediate those things are being taken care of. We had a student who 2 days into the program tested positive with COVID-19. That student was actually sitting next to the principal for 2 days. So we knew where that student was. We knew who it was. And so we were able to trace all the people engaged. And the principal was basically said, look, I'm 100%. This student was right here because, when I told them to sit down or stand up, they were doing whatever I told them for 2 days. And the student didn't know he was asymptomatic, and he didn't show up to school one day, and we called to check on him. And later on in the conversation, we found out that there was someone in the family, not the mother, but someone in the family that tested positive, that caused everyone to get tested, and his test came back positive. So we had a protocol that we needed to go through with the school district and all those type of things. And it worked out great. The school district cleans. Now, this is one of the things that a lot of, if I was wherever I am, wherever you are, I would make sure you hold the school district accountable, because I don't know about your taxes, but I know a healthy part of my taxes is making sure our schools are 21st century on the cutting edge, and we don't have no problem with investing into our school districts. But during this time, the school district needs to make sure they do whatever they can to make sure we're educating our kids. And so the school district did all the homework and did all the things they needed to do to verify with all the contacting, and they have been cleaning the church every hour on the hour. They clean the church detailed every hour on the hour. Everything that is touched is cleaned every hour. And at the end of the day, we fumigate the church and we get ready for the next day.
Yeah, I would say that, and pun intended here, Reverend Jones, you've really done your homework, and our churches should also make sure that they're doing their homework, having the conversations with their local church members, the school systems, and anyone else that may be involved, and probably parents as well, so that everybody's on the same page. And this can be done, and it's certainly a way that that the church can be in mission to the world.
If in your community there's some similarity with what Reverend Jones has shared related to the school district having some parity in forming the relationship and the partnership, then by all means, there should be some discussions with how the church can utilize existing resources, cleaning and staffing, and then coming up with the protocols for contact tracing. In other communities, I've seen the school system is providing all the responsibility and liability on the church to absorb not only the staffing responsibility, but the cleaning responsibility as well. And so careful thought has to go into whether or not the church has the capacity to absorb that kind of responsibility. And I would encourage pastors as well as laity within the church to form some type of team so that you can think through all of the nuances related to how to best support the school. It could be that if the school district or the school is not able to provide support, as Reverend Jones has outlined, with assistance with cleaning as well as with staffing, that there may be other ways in which you can support parents and students within your district. If your church, and I like the way Reverend Jones very diplomatically stated that you have baby boomers and the greatest generation in your church. And certainly those individuals are your vulnerable populations, and you don't want to put them in situations where they are at risk for a variety of health reasons. So again, forming teams within your church to look at the partnership with the school, the partnership with the school district, and the best way for there to be some sharing and responsibility as much as possible.
And I don't think we need to do this in isolation. When we embarked upon this for this particular school, I was on a Zoom and we had 20 different school partners saying that we're going to collaborate on this together. And so if I have University of Houston, which is a mammoth thing, but if I have a department to say we're going to provide volunteers, if I have a food restaurant saying, hey, we'll prepare a meal for the volunteers or in the staff, if I have all these different community partners coming together. So what I want to encourage you to get out of your limitation. When it's a kingdom project, God provides beyond the church. It's not limited to what you can do. It's based, if it's the kingdom, all of his resources. In just the other day, I'm just sitting there, one of the community partners, we have a city park that is called Emancipation Park, and they have a foundation. They brought some safety kits for all the families that's in part of the school. The Urban League brought 2 cases of books for the kids to give out to the kids. It was a small, get this, and I want to make sure you understand this. This is so important. It was a small nonprofit started by a high schooler who brought PPE, some 500 things of PPE to the thing. Now, this is a high schooler. And I want to make sure you understand, we have more nonprofits being started in this day and time because the church got stuck. And nonprofits are developing to meet needs that the church has turned inward and stopped meeting. And so these nonprofits are coming to the church to say, whatever you need. I'm serious. I'm getting calls from nonprofits who see the church being the church and they want to help the church be successful, whatever we're doing. So I want to encourage you to make sure you do everything you can to ensure that you reach out beyond the church and watch what God can do through your community partners.
What a wonderful opportunity it was to hear from Reverend Jones and Camille and to consider what might be possible for our churches and our communities working with our schools. And such an inspirational message. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit the conference website, and click on the Congregations for Children's page. And there we have some guidelines for building effective and sustainable church and school partnerships that will include also things to consider during this time of COVID-19. You can also reach out directly to Camille at czroddy@hotmail.com. That's czroddy@hotmail.com for any questions regarding Congregations for Children and how you might start school partnerships or strengthen your school partnerships. And you can also reach Rev. Ed Jones at rev.edcjones at tumchtx.org. That's rev.edcjones at tumchtx.org. I'll put that information as well as the guidelines for sustainable partnerships for schools in the show notes. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to bringing another Means of Grace podcast for you into the future.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. Once again, that's at WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.